Say when.
You are good to go.
Okay. Good evening. I would like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of April 25th, 2022 to order. My name is JD Pachariva, Counselor and Chair of Community Service and Infrastructure. The order of the agenda has been amended tonight to allow for Community Services and Infrastructure agenda to follow the statutory public meeting. We're meeting electronically through Zoom in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act, which provides for electronic participation and the town's procedural bylaw. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast at our YouTube channel. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm quorum for tonight's meeting.
Sure, Chair. Mayor Easton, I see your hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was a little ahead. That's for item 4. My apologies.
Okay. And Mayor Easton, you are in attendance. Councilor Regima?
Here, thank you.
Councilor Russell?
Here.
Councilor Pachariva?
I am here.
Councilor McPherson?
Here.
Councilor and Deputy Mayor Miklick?
Here.
Councilor Timmers?
Here.
Councilor Reimer?
Here.
And Councilor Bernays sends his regrets. However, we do have quorum. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. In addition, I'd like to take a moment to welcome our staff that we have joining us today electronically. We have our Chief Administrative Officer, Michael Kirkopoulos from the basement at home, Director of Finance, Administration, and Innovation, Lawrence Wagner, Director of Special Projects, Ms. Kathleen Dale, Director of Planning and Development, Mr. Matt Bruder, Manager of Planning and Development, Monica Coquiera. Welcome, Monica. Planner, Allison Martin. Allison, nice to see you in person. Put a face to the name on the reports. Director of Economic Development and Communications, Mr. Paul Deaney. Manager of Corporate Communications, Liliana Busnello. Director of Public Works, David Graham. Associate Director of Public Works, Ms. Jillian Harris. Manager Capital Projects, Walter Neubauer. Director of Community Services, Shannon McKay. Associate Director, Recreation and Culture, Ms. Sarah Ain. Cultural Development Coordinator, Jessica Wilson. Landscape Architect, Madison Daly. Climate Change Coordinator, Shannon Fernandez. Director of Legislative Services / Town Clerk, Julie Kirklos. Legislative Committee Coordinator, Deanna Phillips. And moderating and clerking the meeting today, we have our Manager of Legislative Services, Deputy Clerk, Devan Kripp. IT staff are also in attendance if we have any missteps. And we have in attendance this evening, Graham Guthrie from the Niagara region, Frank Tassoni from the Niagara region, Deanna Morelli from the Niagara region, Michelle Sergi from the Niagara region, and Tim Johnson, Project Advisor from Mohawk. As this is a virtual meeting, I will ask that we follow some procedures during tonight's meeting. Should there be a connection or service disruption for the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and our deputy clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair, the deputy clerk will ask those in attendance to wait up for 10 minutes to provide the chair time to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time, the vice chair, Councillor Greg Reimer, will resume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes their role. Each member of council who wishes to speak, please press the raised hand feature on your video call. Your worship, are you in? You were asking a question, or are you?
I'm asking a question under item 4, confirmation of agenda.
Okay, we're still on 2, so I'll get to you. I won't forget you.
All right.
Okay, each member of council who wishes to speak, please use the raise hand function on your video call, and the deputy clerk will track our speakers list today and will invite you to speak when I open for comments or questions. Also, when I finish reading a motion and announce the mover, the deputy clerk will then call out the vote by reading each member of council's name out loud. Please remember to take yourself off mute during this portion of the meeting so that you can confirm if you support or oppose. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourselves on mute. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? I see none. Your worship, here's your cue. Do members have any amendments to the order of tonight's agenda?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to request that item 7.2.4 under reports be moved up as 7.2.1, and that the report PD 21-22 become 7.2.2.
Sorry, Mayor Easton, if I could get some clarification through you, Chair Pachariva. The agenda has been revised, so I'm not sure if you're looking at the version with the amendments indicating that community services and infrastructure is going first. So I just want to make sure we are on the same page. What report are you referring to be moved up first?
I'm asking that 7.2.4, which is AD 09-22, be moved up first when we get to reports.
Okay, thank you. So through you, Chair, just to clarify, so we will move AD 09-22, which is the More Homes for Everyone plan, up to be the first report under consideration for planning and economic development agenda, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, because we adjusted the agenda earlier today because we've got a presentation from the region. So we're going to deal with that first, and then that will be the first of Councillor Mikulic's, Chair Mikulic's section tonight.
Okay, and then that will be followed by PD 21-22, the Garden Suites report.
Through you, Chair, yes, we can take the vote on that right now to make that confirmation.
Thank you very much.
So just to clarify, so everyone is clear on what is being voted on. So we will be moving AD 09-22 to the first report to consider under the PED agenda, which will be followed as order. So PD 21-22 regarding the Garden Suites next, PD 24-22, and then PD 23-22. And with that, I'm going to call the vote. Chair, is that okay?
Sure.
Councillor Regima?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Mikulic?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Chair?
Yes.
And that carries. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Devan. And you remind us of that when we get to that section, correct? Lovely.
Correct.
That's why we like having you here. Okay, so we have one statutory public meeting this evening. The purpose of the public meeting is to receive comments from the public and consider questions regarding a zoning bylaw amendment by William and Linda Emsley. We will consider the staff report associated with the item immediately after the statutory public meeting. Section 17, subsection 15, and 34, subsection 12 of the Planning Act requires that before adopting an official plan amendment and before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must ensure that sufficient information and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered, and council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendment or amendments. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the town of Lincoln before the zoning amendment is approved or a decision is made on the draft plan of subdivision, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of town council to the Ontario Land Tribunal, OLT. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and may be contained in an appendix to a staff report published in a meeting, agenda, delegation list, and/or minutes of the public meeting and made part of the public record. The town of Lincoln collects this information in order to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of council's decisions. It may also be used to serve notice of an Ontario Land Tribunal hearing. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individually expressly requests the town to remove their personal information. The disclosure of this information is governed by the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Our public meeting is for the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment by William and Linda Emsley, PD 22-22. We are now in the delegations portion of the statutory public meeting, and we have one registered delegation. Please note delegations may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. I will look to our clerk to keep the clock going on that for me. Once you have received the delegation committee, we'll transition directly into the report and motion. Our delegation for this item is William and Linda Emsley. So William and Linda, please go ahead and welcome tonight.
Thank you. So the overview for this application is that we purchased 3754 Walker Road, which is a farm with our home house and 70 acres in 2012. And the same year we purchased 50 acres of the adjoining farm at 3864, which is the subject of the application. It has a house and it has 50 acres. And then in 2019, we purchased the last remaining parcel between Fly and Mountain View, another 22 acres. So in total, we're farming 142 acres here. The house at 3864 was rented out to a tenant, but is extra to our needs now, and we wanted to subdivide it and sell it. And as a condition of doing so, we had to apply to rezone the 50 acres at that farm as agricultural purposes only. And that's the purpose of this application. The farm the 142 acres here will continue to be farmed in its traditional rotation, which is winter wheat, corn and soybeans. That's what we intend to do and we have done for the last 10 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from committee? Okay, I see none. There being no further delegations for this item, I now declare the public meeting to address the zoning bylaw amendment by William and Linda Emsley adjourned. I have a motion moved by Councillor Manjima. The council receive and file as information the following delegation regarding item 5.1, zoning bylaw amendment application by William and Linda Emsley. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor McLeish,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton. Mayor Easton,
My apologies, support.
thank you. Councillor Regina,
Support.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva,
Yes, support.
thank you. That carries.
Okay, thank you, Devan. We will now move directly into report PD 22-22 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment by William and Linda Emsley. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Manjima.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is about process. So in the report on page 7, it outlines the process that we put in place for planning applications, such as this, where if there's a consent application that's uncontested, as it is in this case, that staff can handle the approval or denial. So in this case, it's been approved, and this zoning amendment is to, as the delegation said, rezone the remaining parcel for agricultural purposes only. So it's really just kind of tying up a bow on the consent, which has already been approved. So my question is, do we really need to be seeing these rezoning applications if we've already agreed that staff has the authority to approve an uncontested consent application? And there could be something I'm missing. Planning, I mean, I know there has to be a public meeting, that's probably part of the issue, but I guess I find it a little bit confusing why a zoning for agricultural purposes only has to come back to council when the biggest issue at hand is whether or not the lot should be severed, and that's already been approved. And the APO is just to protect the remaining farmland, which few people would argue is a bad idea. In fact, I think it's required under provincial policy. So I'm wondering if somebody can speak to that and tell me if there's
Mr. Bruder, would you like to take that?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that's a good question for sure, Councillor, and you're right. In this case, it is a condition of the consent. The consent was approved, no issues at all with that. And you're also correct. The main reason for coming forward tonight is the public meeting requirement. That is a statutory requirement under the Planning Act. That said, there's a couple of things to add. First of all, being that, we try to streamline these things when these types of zoning amendments come to you. You'll notice we're also including a recommendation in the very same night. We've done this previously for these just to keep it moving instead of this having to come back yet again. But also, when we look to the report later on about Bill 109 and what's being approved and maybe some of the things that are the moving pieces that the province is recommending regarding, additional delegated authority in certain instances for some minor things in terms of, items like lifting holding provisions, temporary uses. Perhaps this is something that we can look at being included in those considerations as well, because you do raise some good points. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Councillor. So there being no further questions, I have a motion moved by Vice Chair Reimer. The council approves zoning bylaw amendment application PLZAC 020220034 in the name of William and Linda Emsley. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Regima,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Support.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Support.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Devan. We have now concluded the statutory public meeting section of the agenda and will now continue to the consent agenda. Thank you, William and Linda. So we are now considering item 6, the consent agenda, inclusive of item 6.1, Museum Advisory Committee minutes of February 17th, 2022. Item 6.2, Housing and Homelessness Community Partnership Advisory Committee minutes of March 8th, 2022. And item 6.3, Municipal Heritage Committee minutes of March 10th, 2022, along with item 6.4, Building and Planning Permit Solution Project Update 4-11 FN 03-22. Would any member of council like to remove an item from the consent agenda to discuss? Okay, there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Renjima that all items listed under the heading of consent agenda for Monday, April 25th, 2022 be adopted as recommended. Item 6.1, Museum Advisory Committee minutes of February 17th, 2022. Item 6.2, Housing and Homelessness Community Partnership Advisory Committee minutes of March 8th, 2022. Item 6.3, Municipal Heritage Committee minutes of March 10th, 2022. And item 6.4, Building and Planning Permit Solution Project Update 4-11 FN 03-22. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Regima,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Yes.
Councillor Patriva.
Yes.
That carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Devan. So we will move into Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda. And with respect to the following items, it has been requested and approved that we recognize the land acknowledgement, which I will now read aloud. Niagara Region is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattawanderack, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara stands with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. We are now at the delegations portion of the Community Services and Infrastructure agenda tonight. We have a presentation from Graham Guthrie, Senior Project Manager, Transportation Engineering, and Frank Tassoni, Associate Director, Transportation Engineering from the Niagara Region. They will be providing an update on the 20 Mile Creek Arch Bridge Replacement Project. Very exciting project that we've all been diligently waiting for from our Ward 3 councillors to Active Transportation Committee. Please note, Graham and Frank, you have 10 minutes, and the Director of Community Services will provide opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair Petriva. I just have a few opening remarks, that being that we're really very pleased and excited this evening to be joined by our regional friends. I think it demonstrates how we've been collaborating and cooperating on a number of very synergistic projects. You're going to hear about 2 this evening and more to follow tomorrow in media releases. So I think it's just a great example how multi-agencies work together, realize that we all have different projects that we may lead, but that they're synergistic and we need to come together to collaborate and cooperate and make sure the timing works for all of them, and that when we're responding to council and resident concerns, we can address those concerns. So really happy to be joined by Frank and Graham this evening, and then our other friends and stakeholders who will join for the next presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. I just realized that. Thank you, Graham and Frank. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for having us here to talk about the 20 Mile Creek Arch Bridge replacement project in Jordan Hollow. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay.
Yes.
Good. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so just a brief introduction to what the existing conditions are for the 20 Mile Creek Arch Bridge. It's located on King Street, which is Regional Road 81 in the Jordan Hollow area of the town of Lincoln. It presently functions as a 2-lane arterial road serving the east and west traffic flows. There's an average annual daily traffic of 5,800 vehicles. And this thoroughfare provides access to residential, commercial, and recreational uses. The closest intersection to the east is 19th Street with Regional Road 81, and on the west is Brookside Drive. The stretch of Regional Road 81 is identified in Niagara Region's Transportation Master Plan as an infill link as part of the strategic cycling network. There are 2 sidewalks, one on each side of the bridge currently, and the 2017 biennial bridge inspection and also our 2019 bridge inspection identified that the sidewalks and curbs are in generally poor condition. In addition, the existing bridge includes a pedestrian path underneath the east arch. The inspection also, I should note, did identify that the bridge should be replaced. So next slide, please. So the Niagara region, we've undertaken an environmental assessment. It was actually a Schedule C environmental assessment, noting that the bridge did have significant heritage features to it, so which basically had us do the Schedule C, Schedule EA. We have gone through 2 PICs, and at PIC number 2, we did identify preferred cross sections, preferred road alignments, and also a preferred bridge design. So we've been very cognizant of the fact that Jordan Hollow requires active transportation facilities. So the preferred cross section does account for active transportation with a 3-meter multi-use path that will be on the, I'll call it the north side of the bridge, basically the downstream side of the bridge. We'll also have 2 3.5-meter lane travel lanes and some shoulders across the bridge as well. Go to the next slide. When we took a look at the road alignment, we did look at several different alignments. We looked at moving the entire road to the north. We looked at moving the road partially to the north, partially to the south. But what came out of all of the assessments was that the preferred alignment would maintain the same alignment that we have today, with a little bit of a widening to account for the multi-use path, and some shouldering on the roadway. The path under the existing bridge, there is an existing pathway under the bridge, kind of right about here on the east side of the bridge. And that will be maintained with the future bridge replacement. The preferred design for the bridge will be a concrete slab on steel girder bridge. Next slide. So what's going to happen during construction? And this is a big topic of conversation because Regional Road 81, it's a major thoroughfare through the town of Lincoln. And there are businesses and recreational facilities in the hollow that obviously we want to keep going. So we'll maintain one lane of traffic at all times during the bridge construction. That will be facilitated through a temporary modular bridge being utilized over the existing bridge to maintain traffic while we construct half of a new bridge to the south. Traffic will then be switched over to the partially constructed new bridge to allow removal of the existing bridge and completion of the new structure. Emergency services will be given priority through the construction site when on an emergency call. Access to businesses, residences, and the Jordan Hollow Park will remain in place during construction. And construction duration is expected to be approximately 12 months. Next slide, please. So of particular interest is the Jordan Hollow Park. As far as, looking at it in a preliminary view, the Jordan Hollow Park will be a preferred laydown area for our bridge construction contractor. The reason for that is it's not feasible for our contractor to use the site outside of Jordan Hollow due to logistics and safety. There's also, at the same time, the town will have a project up on 19th Street and 81, which would interfere with the logistics of getting girders and any other bridge-related construction materials down into the hollow. So the Niagara region and the town of Lincoln and the construction contractor will determine at the time of construction what the suitable location of the laydown area within the park, which allows the facility still to be used by residents. In the little picture here, just very preliminary, this is a possible laydown area within the park. The access to the parking lot will still be maintained, and the contractor will obviously use the laydown area without using the parking lot and get the materials to the bridge. The one thing that we cannot maintain during construction is the pathway underneath the bridge, because that would be directing pedestrians to an open construction site, which is, as everybody can guess, fairly dangerous. So next slide. So next steps, Frank Tassone is going to walk us through the next steps, including some other initiatives that are underway.
Thanks, Graham. So we wanted to just highlight some works that are in the area. So you can see the next steps with respect to the actual bridge project here on the screen. We're in Q2, we'll be filing the environmental assessment and commencing the detailed design. We'll be undertaking a feasibility study, which I'm going to speak to in a second, for active transportation within the Jordan Hollow. And then we'll be commencing utility relocations in 2023 and also construction in Q3 of 2023.
Excuse me, this is your 2-minute warning.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to outline some works that are happening in the area. Obviously, the town of Lincoln is undertaking the 19th Street and Main Street upgrades that include the intersection of King Street. And on top of the 20-mile arch bridge, there's a couple of at least 2 or 3 other projects that are in the general area. And I just wanted to highlight some timing. That way, everyone on the meeting tonight has a general sense of how this is going to move forward. So together with our partners at the town, we are undertaking a feasibility study, which is also going to likely include a Class B environmental assessment to look at active transportation from 19th Street all the way down and through to Brookside, and then from Brookside up to 21st, which will connect into our other project that we have going in Vineland. So that study will commence. It's being completed as a joint effort between the region and the town. And we'll look at the feasibility of adding AT facilities through the hollow. And I'm sure that you're all aware of the difficulties that will present us with respect to the actual road platform. But while that is ongoing, we'll be constructing our Vineland project, which will take us from 21st Street to Vinehaven Trail. And then on the east side, past the current project that's being undertaken by the town, we have another environmental assessment that's going to start, that's going to look at the block between 19th and John and look at St. John and look at the skewed intersection there. So we are going to have a significant amount of works happening in the area, and we have them currently staged in to be the 20-mile arch bridge, and then Vineland construction will follow that. And while that's happening, we'll be undertaking the feasibility study with the intention of further into the future locating a construction project to run active transportation through the hollow. So I just wanted to make that connection. That way, all of the projects within the area could be identified, because I'm sure that there's going to be some question as to how that all fits together. And I thought I would just maybe explain that first instead of leaving those questions out there. So hopefully that does a good job of explaining the projects that we have in the area, explaining our next steps and where we are with the 20-mile arch bridge. And at this time, I would open up the floor to any questions.
Thank you very much, Graham and Frank. And Frank, I apologize for mispronouncing your last name. So mine gets butchered all the time.
Oh, no problem.
Okay, I'm going to make note of that. So, committee, any questions to Graham and Frank on this very, very exciting project? Councillor McCulloch.
Thank you very much, Chair Petriva. Through you to Frank, thank you for coming. Just curious on the timing of the construction. You have it slated for, was it the third quarter of 20? Does that fall during the summertime? Is there any concern about traffic with a one lane?
So through Mr. Chair, yes, that does fall during the summertime. I don't believe that there would be any major concerns regarding the one lane of traffic. We quite often do this on bridge construction where we have remote flagmen. The biggest concern for us is that we'll have to determine a strategy for dealing with the pedestrians. As Graham had highlighted, the crossover from the park side to the restaurant side there will not be available during construction because it'll be an active construction site. So we'll have to work with the contractor and with our consultant throughout the detailed design stage to try and determine how we're going to deal with the pedestrians. And that would be our biggest concern at that point.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that answer. I just hope, I'm excited to see this project move forward. I'm kind of hoping that it maybe starts in the spring instead of the summer of that year, if possible. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor McCulloch. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Graham and Frank. Absolutely a very, very exciting time for us out here in the Vineland Jordan area. You know, it is just so good to see this coming and starting. You know, the process of active transportation. I know there's a lot of migrant workers that are probably going to be very pleased 3, 4, 5 years down the road, maybe whatever that timeline is, to get a safer journey through the Jordan Hollow, along with many that want to walk that area, that are running in that area. And I don't think I have to tell you that it is currently dangerous to access that Jordan Hollow without a car or a vehicle of some kind. So great to see, starting with the bridge and then the active transportation project. Very, very pleased to also hear about the active transportation project extending from 19th Street up in Jordan right through to St. John's Drive. And we certainly know about downtown Vineland and the work that's going to happen in 2024, where we've got an urbanization project going into downtown Vineland. So much going on there between the region and the town of Lincoln over the course of the next, really over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. So it's a lot going on. So appreciate that. Appreciate you coming tonight. My only question would be, is there any consideration for the Brookside to 23rd Street piece? When you look at everything that is happening, that would be the last little piece of real estate, if you will, from an active transportation standpoint, to connect right from the Vinehaven Trail right through to St. John's Drive. And when you look at Brookside, I don't know the exact number of homes, but I'm going to guess there's 100 homes in there or so that are kind of isolated today from getting out on the street and walking to downtown Vineland. So I just wonder if there was discussion of including that section of Brookside Drive through to 23rd with everything else going on in the area. Just to me would seem a bit of a miss if we didn't include that and add that to all of what is going on. So I wonder, through to Graham or Frank, through you, Mr. Chair, if you could make comment on that.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, yes, that section is being included in the feasibility study section. So that will go from 23rd, where the Vineland project ends, and it will go all the way through to 19th Street. So it will be included.
Wonderful. Outstanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the regional staff for their presentation this evening. It's really quite exciting. If you can get excited about a bridge, this is certainly the one to get excited about. And I have a couple of questions. Just adding a bit more to Councillor Mikulic's question. The farm traffic in this area is pretty substantial. And so I'm just wondering, I guess, Frank, that would be to you, I think. What is your consideration being about that? I mean, it's pretty slow right now. It'll be even more slow because there will be delays. And I'm not concerned about the delays. This job has to get done, no question about it. But have you considered the farm traffic in the overall plans?
So through Mr. Chair, yes, we do consider that, and we also will have the ability to list the project on our municipal 511 platform, which will notify motorists that are using their GPSs that there is active construction happening in the area. So although it won't alleviate the delays, there will be short-term delays. It may serve to redirect some traffic that know that there is active construction happening in the area. And it's our anticipation that at the beginning of construction, there will be some delays, but as construction progresses, those that are familiar with the area will likely reroute to other areas to get around the hollow in order to make their travel. So we will have to deal with some small delays at the beginning, but we're hoping that those are manageable.
Okay. When you look at the potential backups that will exist both on the east and the west side, I'm thinking about 19th Street and how the backups there, until that is signalized, but maybe we're going to be okay in terms of the timing. I'm thinking now that we're going to be okay, Mr. Chairman, with the timing as far as 19th Street getting signalized. And so maybe those backups won't be as much of an issue, but that could be a pretty interesting passage through there.
Yeah, and through Mr. Chair, we have the abilities when we start the bridge project with the remote flagman, we have the ability to set the timing so that we can circulate traffic so that you don't ever have a scenario where you're backing traffic anywhere up near 19th Street. So we do have that flexibility within the remote flagman to be able to program them for different cycles on either side of the bridge, which will help us to manage those potential issues.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, my third question then is about the retaining wall on the south side. And what will the status of that be, Frank?
So through Mr. Chair, a portion of the feasibility study is going to be looking at the potential for replacement renewal of that lower retaining wall. The feasibility study will also look at if we were to add active transportation, would it be more advantageous for us to add to the downstream side of the road and widen the platform out that way, or cut into the embankment on the upstream side of the road. We recognize that there are some structural issues with that retaining wall that we're currently monitoring on a very frequent basis. Graham has taken care of an emergency repair there previously, and we looks like we may have another one coming up at some point this summer to deal with another area that appears to have had a small failure over the winter. But it is our intention that as a part of the feasibility study for the active transportation, that structural retaining wall on the downstream side will be reviewed and recommendations made on the replacement of that.
Okay, that's great. I wondered about that. It was looking like it was bulging, but I mean, I'm not an engineer. I don't know, but I know it's certainly looks like it was changing. Mr. Chairman, I would like to, through you, ask one of the regional staff to stay on the call while we have the presentation by staff regarding the park, because I have a question around the aesthetics and artistic elements regarding the bridge that I'd like to ask at that time, and I'd like them to be part of that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Let me mute.
You
Frank
are
and
on
Graham,
mute,
you're good with that?
I'm fine with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
That's
Vice Chair
good.
Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. A couple of questions through to Frank and to, sorry, I lost them on the screen now. Graham, thank you for coming tonight. Just regarding two things, regarding the businesses that are, and there is a few businesses there. Is there any talks of signage, just to let people know there is, especially as mentioned, the mayor mentioned about the construction going on in Jordan, just that people are aware that their businesses are still open?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. During construction, we will have the typical businesses open signage, making sure that everybody knows that the road isn't closed, the businesses are open throughout the entire duration of construction.
Okay. Thank you, Graham. And one more question, Chair Patriva, just regarding the work cycle or work week through to Frank and Graham. Is there any talk of extending the work week or making it a full week, just to, because this is a bottleneck? I can still remember the last time this happened, and I think it's even bigger than we imagined. Even with the quarries that we have, local quarries, I know they'll be using different alternate routes, but there's a lot of construction, a lot of greenhouse farm traffic, everything going on, and this is still a major route. Has there been any discussion on a faster work cycle for this project?
I can take through you, Mr. Chair. We haven't had any discussions yet around that, but that's certainly, we can take that away and take a look at it. Extending the work week obviously has some logistics to it. Sundays are fairly busy down in the Hollow, so that's something we'd have to take a look at. But yeah, it's certainly something we can take away.
Thanks, Frank and Graham. Thank you, Chair Patriva.
Thank you, Vice Chair Reimer. Councillor Nchima.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure whether this question should go through to the delegations or to staff, but just a little bit further to what Councillor Reimer was asking. And I'm thinking of one particular business that's down in the Hollow, and that's Boo's Restaurant. I know they'll be affected. I mean, people might be sort of slowed down during construction and may decide to stop and pull over and have something to eat when they otherwise wouldn't have. So they may pick up new customers, but I think their business is going to be affected in some way. So my question is, how are they engaged in the process? Have they been engaged so far, and how will they be engaged? And just sort of, how will we let them know that we're all paying attention and we're aware of that this is going to affect their business?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the restaurant and the businesses and the residents down in Jordan Hollow, they were all provided hand-delivered notices of the PICs. They were able to comment during the public information centers for the environmental assessment. We will also continue to work with them, during construction. Prior to construction, we will touch base with them, make sure that as much as we can alleviate their concerns. But yeah, this will potentially have an impact on some businesses down in the Hollow.
Mm-hmm.
If I may add to that as well, that we have identified that the pedestrians crossing there to get over to Boo's Restaurant is going to be a major focus of ours, and how we can get them safely across the road. So we want to make sure that the folks that do go down to the Hollow with the intention of going to the restaurant, or if there's any other functions happening down there, that they feel comfortable that they can cross that road safely. And so we have to develop that plan during the detailed design stage, but we're well aware that is going to be a major consideration, and we're prepared to to put the effort in to make sure that is an area where pedestrians, residents, visitors to the area can all feel safe crossing the road.
Yeah, that's great.
Director McKay.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to add that we will, as we've been working together and collaborating on our projects, we will be cross-communicating. So we have a Speak Up Lincoln page that you're going to hear about as part of the Jordan Hollow Indigenous Cultural Park, and we will be putting linkages to the regional project as well. So when residents come to see updates on our park project, they can also get updates on the regional project. So we'll continue to meet and collaborate and engage, and I think provide feedback to the region when we are hearing comments and questions related to that project.
Thank you very much. And let's hope too that it's what it turns out, like the Utopia project, that the workers then they've got a captive lunch crowd, right, from the people doing the work on the bridge. They might have their breaks and their lunch there and become the best patrons for Booze. So there's always opportunity, right? And it's how you deliver that, and really appreciate, guys, that those messages were hand delivered, right? So awesome. So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor McPherson. The council receive and file as information the following presentation regarding item 7.1.1, update on the 20 Mile Creek Arch Bridge replacement from Graham Guthrie and Frank Tassone, Niagara Region. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton?
Support.
Councillor Timmers?
Support.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Miklick?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Patriva?
Yes, please.
Thank you. That carries.
Awesome. Thank you, Devan. So we will now consider item 7.2.1, report CS 07-22, regarding the Jordan Hollow Indigenous Cultural Park. Project update and concept design. Our Associate Director of Recreation and Culture, Cultural Development Coordinator, and Landscape Architect will be presenting, along with Tim Johnson, Project Advisor from Mohawk. Please note, you have a maximum of 10 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Patriva, and good evening, Mayor Easton and members of council. And thank you for the opportunity to provide this project update this evening. I'm joined this evening by our project team members, Jessica Wilson, Madison Daly, and Shannon Fernandez. Also in attendance this evening are the creative minds behind the concept, Scott Henderson from Adesso Design Inc., who partnered with Two Row Architect. It's also my pleasure to introduce Tim Johnson, who is acting as a trusted advisor on this project and is joining us this evening. Tim is an experienced education, museum, and arts executive who resides at Six Nations. He's the former associate director for museum programs at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of the American Indian. His philanthropic interests include heritage projects of lasting significance in the community centered around history and culture, the visual and performing arts, education, and environmental sustainability. So welcome, Tim, and thank you for joining us this evening. Next slide, please. A brief overview of our presentation tonight, which will include the journey to date on this concept design, this design selection process the team used, a review of the elements of the concept design, additional funding that's been secured to support the park, and some next steps and some discussion about placemaking in Lincoln. Next slide, please. During the 2020 capital budget process, council approved $83,000 for enhancement at Jordan Hollow Park. Staff quickly started researching other cultural parks and forming relationships with key stakeholders in the Indigenous environmental communities. An early park vision was developed. It would be a space that would storytell and interpret, showcase public art installations, have green infrastructure elements, and be available for public programming opportunities. Remaining a passive park, but one that had an important story to tell of both the land and the people who first inhabited it. This project holds particular significance to Lincoln residents and Indigenous people with ties in the Niagara area because it's an important step in the process of reconciliation. To date, there have been no public placemaking projects that recognize Lincoln as the traditional territorial land of Indigenous people before the arrival of European settlers. The land that has been designated for this project along the 20 Mile Creek has been a location of human settlement long prior to European arrival, due to its proximity to water and fertile agricultural lands. As a municipality, we are committed to reconciliation, and acknowledgement of this history through an innovative and collaborative project is one step in the process. Next slide, please.
As Sarah said, key stakeholders were identified at the project outset, and we've worked to develop relationships with collaboration and partnership with them throughout the project. Developing the RFP was a process that we count upon with the expertise of Tim Johnson, our project advisor, who has a wealth of knowledge and experience in developing projects similar in scope, such as Landscape of Nations Memorial and the Voices of Freedom Park in Niagara-on-the-Lake, to name just two of them. A significant amount of time was spent with the project advisor and staff to develop the RFP so that it communicated the overall vision for the park, and it provided sufficient context regarding the importance of the site to the neutral nation people who were an Iroquois-speaking hunting and farming society that we know through archaeological evidence lived and settled in the Jordan area from the early 16th century to the mid 17th century. The RFP was circulated to the artistic community across Canada, and we received 3 proposals. We gathered a selection committee of Indigenous arts, curatorial, and academic professionals to assess the submissions. Their experience as artists and arts professionals was really important to the project because one of the intents of the park is that it's a cultural destination, and we very much want to evoke artistic excellence. So we needed professionals who would be able to guide us in that decision-making process and evaluate the proposals critically. The selection committee members included a distinguished group of individuals, namely Dr. Robin Bourgeois, Janice Montier, and of course, Tim Johnson. I'll now pass it over to Tim so he can talk about how we came to a decision on the awarded proposal.
It was important when we were developing the RFP to really focus on the history that existed and was evidenced in the town of Lincoln. And so we thought that focusing on the neutral nation would be very important. There's been a few plaques throughout the Niagara Peninsula, but nobody's really paid much attention to this. And at the time of European contact, the neutral nation was the group that occupied most of the Niagara Peninsula. Of course, as Sarah said earlier, Indigenous peoples had been around for thousands of years, but yet the first encounters were with the neutral nation people. So we thought that it was really would be unique and important and respectful to start from that sort of foundation. The decision on the applications and proposals were centered around which applicant we felt best adhered to the criteria and the history that we had presented within the RFP. And Adesso, along with Tour Architect, were the group that came forward that we thought really met those conditions most closely, but also a group that we could work with to further refine and develop the design over the course of the project.
Next slide, please. This is the final concept design, and I want to highlight that although the details of this important project are key, this is still a concept, and as we move into detailed design, the finer details of the park will be worked out. So I'm just going to highlight some of the key features. So we have a new trail that will be added to draw park users further into the park to better utilize the space. And this trail will lead to seating, native plantings, shade trees, a longhouse structure that will not only be sculptural, but also partially covered, and then will also act as a shade structure. The trail also will connect the park to a larger context by safely bringing users west to enhanced connection to the Bruce Trail. There's also an open opportunity for future connection to the north of the park to the trail owned by Ontario Heritage Trust, who have committed to working with the town, the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, and the Bruce Trail Conservancy on their Niagara 20 Valley Trail Revitalization Program. Also to the north of the side of the trail, there's a rain garden that will include native plants and educational signage. And I'll also note that a stormwater management assessment will be completed in detailed design to determine the exact size and capacity requirements. The parking lot will also be designed to be paved, and utilities will be added such as lighting and water, although they'll be considered in detailed design. They're not in this scope of work currently due to budget constraints. With that said, staff will continue to investigate funding and creative partnership opportunities to make those amenities happen. Also inside the park, there is the existing structure that will remain and will have bike parking and a bicycle repair station. And on the other side of the parking lot, there is a sculptural feature of palisades with additional signage. The open space area will be regraded to create a natural amphitheater and allow for seating opportunities for programming underneath the longhouse. Next slide, please. So now we're going to go through some 3D renderings that really show the details of this exciting park project. So this slide shows the park entry. We've worked with the region to redevelop an appropriate driveway layout, and we'll continue to work with them in the planning department to ensure that the parking lot layout and design is best. The region has also agreed to
minute remaining.
The region has also agreed to allow us to put the park sign in the same location, but turn it so that it's more visible. Next slide, please. And this slide shows the height of the berm. So the existing park is flat and sits 1 meter lower than the roadway, and the new high point of the berm will come up to that height, so it won't be obstructing any vision into the park. Now I'll have Tim explain some of the important key aspects of the features. Next slide, please.
So I think, as it was mentioned earlier, the neutral nation were an Iroquoian-speaking people. A confederacy of sorts existent within the Niagara Peninsula from Niagara River Corridor through Hamilton, Burlington, Brantford, and so forth. So the design team came up with this idea here of using a longhouse form, sort of a symbolic artistic interpretation of that architectural form that would have been part of the neutral nation experience. And so that becomes both a shade area and also a presentation area for public programming. The way this is positioned also into the sort of the field area there and leading to the berm, it becomes sort of a secondary performance space as well. So we kind of are combining two public program areas into one in a very effective way. One of the things you can see in the upper left photograph there, and I don't know, Madison, if we wanted to move on in images, but one of the things we liked about the design was this connecting trail, this sort of corridor that embraces the entire park. And along that corridor as well, we see the opportunity for additional commissioned artworks to be presented. We're thinking about it really kind of as almost an exhibit hallway or corridor upon which on either side other commissions can happen. So that makes it a living park, and it's quite different than anything we've done previously in the peninsula in terms of Indigenous public spaces. And I think it makes this really exciting for some of us. So you can see here these kind of white slab stones. These are like plinths upon which contemporary sculptures and other designs can be placed, and these can be added over time throughout the years. The pathway or this corridor, this art corridor itself, is part of the Bruce Trail and leads underneath the bridge. Ultimately, when it's safe to do so. Okay.
Next slide, please. This is just a quick image showing the trail connection. You can see the access to the longhouse and the trail access from the parking lot. Next slide, please.
And the Palisades, as we know from the archaeological evidence of the neutral nation, they were also referred to as the Adirondaron or Adirondack or Chinotan. None of these names are actually identifiers of the people in their own language for themselves. So neutral nation, I think, is still the generally accepted way to talk about this particular cultural group. But the Palisades were in existence around the villages and longhouses. And in this context, it also provides some screening, if you will, and some privacy from the landowners next door.
Next slide, please.
So as of today, the total project budget for the park is $348,000. And staff, with the assistance of stakeholders, have been able to leverage the initial capital investment by council of $83,000 to secure over $265,000 in grant funding. External funding represents 80% of the total project budget, and we will continue as a staff team to investigate all additional funding opportunities that are applicable to this park project. Next slide, please. There are a number of key steps that our staff team will take to ensure this project continues to move forward and is successful. We'll continue to work with external stakeholders and ensure strong communication with respect to the roadway and trail projects that you've heard about this evening. Our goal is to complete the park detailed design this year, and that will include consultation with the Joint Accessibility Advisory Committee. As mentioned in the previous slide, we're always investigating those funding opportunities to support the project budget. And the community can also expect opportunities for education, including public programming with the Niagara Regional Native Center. Additionally, later this year, Tim has offered generously to provide a community presentation at our museum about legacy spaces. Next slide, please.
So this is really an interesting project to me because it creates a legacy space that draws attention to Indigenous culture and people who have not received the recognition that they deserve. And it's a real pleasure that a really good situation that the town of Lincoln is taking this on. These legacy spaces, as they emerge throughout the region and throughout the province, are important because they represent to me the responsibilities that municipalities are taking on in this era of truth and reconciliation, helping to fulfill some of those 94 recommendations that came out of that process. And so in this particular case, we're doing something that's really innovative, unique, respectful, helps to round out the history, the Indigenous history of the region, and becomes a dynamic space that the public can use. And I think it's really compelling.
We all believe this project is an important one, and as Sarah said, it's the first of its kind for the town of Lincoln. We anticipate that the park will be a landmark and a destination, and it will be the gateway to the town's cultural corridor. There have been recent ongoing investments in Jordan Village, including the new museum, the Jordan Village Improvement Project, and now the announcement from the Ontario Heritage Trust that they'll be undertaking the revitalization project on the 20 Valley Trail. This will connect several sites together, including Jordan Hollow Park with the Lincoln Museum and Cultural Centre and Main Street Jordan. These investments will solidify the town's efforts to market Jordan Village as a destination within the region, both for community and for visitors. So we excitedly anticipate the completion of this project in due course, because we know that it will further make Lincoln a place to grow, to prosper, and to belong. Next slide, please.
So at this time, we'd like to take the opportunity to thank Council for their support on this important park project, as well as all of the funders who have committed to us. We'd be pleased to answer any questions Council may have at this time.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, Tim, Madison, and Jessica for that presentation. We've let our delegations go over tonight, so I'm going to ask committee to be very succinct in your questions, right? Just get to the question, no preamble. So Councilor Timmers, lead us off, set the example.
Chair Patrick, I'm very excited about this project. First question would be, you made me nervous. I like the concept. I know where I was going. With the park, was there any consideration into doing perhaps an interpretive plaque, partnering with the Heritage Committee, telling the story, maybe some nice photos, bit of the history? I think that would be a really great piece. History to the staff, if that had been considered at all.
Yes, I mean, the answer is yes. There will be signage on the site that helps to orient folks to the history that it represents. In addition, I always recommend coming behind these types of projects with educational programs as well. We did that with Landscape of Nations. Also did it with the First Nations Peace Monument in Thorold, and most of these Indigenous legacy spaces. It's important that the public have access to the information. So the answer is yes, there will be signage that helps to inform people about what they're seeing and why it's important.
That's great. I think it is very important, and I can just envision some great programming happening in that area. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Timmers. Councilor McLeod.
Thank you very much, Chair Patriva, through you to the team. Fantastic drawing. Very excited to see this come to fruition. Question I have is, there's an amphitheater, and I'm looking at this as an educational park as well. And Tim Johnson mentioned that. And I know myself, I could always learn a thing or two. And I'm thinking, is it possible that there's going to be classrooms, teachers wanting to go on field trips to this park, for their students to learn this sort of thing? When I look at the parking lot and its configuration, will it be able to accommodate school buses?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, I think that that'll be something that's considered through the detailed design process when we look at the parking lot specifically. As Madison mentioned, we'll be detailing out the specifications for the parking lot, but at this time, the paving of that parking lot is not included in the project budget. We're very hopeful that we have a little bit of time ahead of us to be able to work on getting some money for that element of the project. But we are definitely working with the Niagara Regional Native Center on public programming. I do agree with you. I think there'll be quite a bit of interest from our school groups, and we'd love to envision seeing them come to the museum perhaps in the morning for some programming, and then eventually walking down that remediated trail to the park for the afternoon to learn about the Indigenous history of that area. So much more for us to work on behind the scenes with our partners. But thank you for that comment, and we'll definitely keep the school bus capacity in mind as we look at the parking lot.
And we will add this particular location when it's completed to the Indigenous Niagara Living Museum tour that we've already established of historic Indigenous places throughout the region. So, and that was developed to encourage school groups to travel through and learn more about Indigenous history by actually visiting locations where it's important. And it makes that history come alive, and it makes it much more memorable and impactful for students.
Thank you. I 100% agree. I know I've seen a classroom at the Jordan Museum, in the back there with the schoolhouse. And I know the kids love that day, and it's a memorable day, and they learn a lot by seeing a lot. And I'm sure they would appreciate and learn a lot about Indigenous history at this new museum. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Michalek. And if you remember too, as part of our 19th Street and Main Street and the parking lot behind the fire hall, there'll be bus parking there. So, great opportunity for the drop off in front of the museum, little tour there down the trail, as Sarah said, to this area and back. Let's get the kids moving and let's teach them at the same time. And then the buses can be there and off they go. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Great presentation. We've come a long way from the original capital project that had a few swing sets, and this is just beautiful. I guess I was lucky, Tim, that I was brought up knowing about the neutral Indians, and certainly the teachings at the museum always reminded us of who had come before us. I have a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman. Tim, what about the transportation route mapping? I think that we might assume that the transportation route was across the Arch Bridge. I don't know whether that's accurate. Is that something that we'll be able to validate that information as part of this project, part of the background information?
That question directed to me. Is this about what type of transportation are you talking about?
I'm talking about the Indigenous transportation routes.
Oh, yes. Yeah, like the Iroquois Trail, right? That goes through there. Yeah, I think, we've got some good documentation on that, but would like to do some more study about it. But my understanding it is that that particular area was on a trail route, which also makes it really interesting, right? Much more interesting to talk about how Indigenous peoples use the area. There was a trail below the escarpment and one above the escarpment. And the escarpment itself being a major landmark that aided in navigation and transportation routes.
That's great. So that leads me into the question that I'm really glad that Frank stayed on. So while we're doing the planning for the bridge, and you're doing that research, I'm happy that that's going to take place. That may provide an opportunity for us to look at some additional iconic images, either on the bridge itself or as you come down the trail, to establish, Mr. Chairman, a look and feel as you walk into that area to get in the mood, if you will. So I just throw that out there because now's the time to start thinking about that sort of thing, whether it's part of the bridge or it becomes part of the landscape. I really could see something quite valuable. What do you think about that, Tim?
That's a really interesting idea, Mayor, because in the research that we've compiled on the neutral nation people, there are a number of objects that provide examples, symbols, that would be interesting to incorporate either on walkways across the road to the restaurant area. We've talked about this in some of our meetings, but on the bridge as well could be quite compelling and interesting. So there are symbols, motifs, things of that nature that we could draw upon that all reinforces the main message of Indigenous, the Jordan Hollow Indigenous Cultural Park. And the aesthetics were an important consideration in our selection of this particular application as well. When I was at the Smithsonian, you would be amazed how much time we spent, not just on the formal content and information of our educational work and displays, but also on aesthetics. And so I think you raise a really, really compelling and interesting point there. An opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. Mr. Chairman, my last question really is around interpretation. So I want to put this issue of colonialism on the table. So it takes two parts, Tim. Number one, if we look at the Indigenous, we look at the timelines, dates, events, people, places for the Indigenous, not just the neutral Indians, but the Indigenous nations that came through this area. The colonial element, which has been very well defined from about 1795 down, so that would have been the start of the American Revolution. But also the timelines, Mr. Chairman, that take us into world events. I think if people could, if we're going to satisfy our angst around dealing with the colonial Indigenous divide, I should say the Indigenous colonial divide that's in people's minds when they think about reconciling all the parts of this, we need to look at it from a world view. It's not just this small park. This small park is going to become, I think, a massive, it's going to have a massive impact on people. So I wondered if you would consider looking at significant dates, events, people, and places locally and with the worldview on the colonial side with the Indigenous piece woven right into that. What do you think about that? Is that an appropriate way to look at truth and reconciliation? Tim?
Yes, in fact, maybe what I should do is share with all of the counselors and yourself. We produced, coming out of the Landscape of Nations Memorial, a process that led to what we call the 10 essential understandings about Indigenous education in the Niagara area. And as you move through that entire document, which was guided really by Indigenous scholars, historians, and cultural resource and language specialists, you gain a really strong Indigenous perspective on it. And it takes you from the earliest time, the earliest origins of Indigenous peoples in this area, all the way through to contemporary times and global connections. So what I'll do is I'll send these to you through Sarah and Jessica, and that can maybe start a deeper conversation.
That's great. And Tim, through you, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank Tim for his work with us. I am a believer that when you have the right people to sit at the table with, you can accomplish anything. You can talk about anything, you can find a solution for anything. And I think Tim is that ideal person, and the others that he brings along with him. We've set a tone here, and I couldn't be happier with the result of this. Even if it takes 8 or 10 years to get everything in place, this is really going to be something extremely important in the entire region. Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Your Worship. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell to receive and file report CS 07-22 regarding Jordan Hollow Indigenous Cultural Park project update and concept design. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Mickley,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Or
Councillor Timmers,
Yeah.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Chair.
Yes,
Thank you. That carries.
thank you very much, Devan. We will now consider item 7.2.2 Public Works Q1 2022 update. PW 08-22, our Director of Public Works, Associate Director of Public Works, and Manager of Capital Projects will now provide a presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Patriva, and thank you to Mayor Easton and members of council for giving staff the opportunity tonight to provide a brief presentation on Public Works projects and programs for the Q1 quarter of 2022. Next slide, please. So our 2022 project work plan aligns with a number of council's strategic priorities. Just to point out a couple, connected community and resilient community. Next slide, please. So the 2022 work plan is a significant plan. We've got 30 projects in total. Staff have been working very hard this past quarter to get the majority of these projects started. We have 27 projects in progress. I'd also like to note that the work plan has a good balance of focus in terms of transportation type projects with 16 and our environmental and safety projects with 14. And I'd also like to note on this slide, we're also reporting on regional projects in our community. And the region has 12 projects underway. And these are significant projects in both transportation and water, wastewater. And I think it really demonstrates the investment being made by the Niagara region within our town with these large projects. Next slide, please. So the top priorities from the past Q1 quarter have been continuing to work with our construction projects. We've been preparing a lot of procurement documents for new capital projects, and operational programs have been a key focus, as well as focus on our environmental assessment and important planning studies. And again, working closely with the Niagara region and other municipal partners on our joint projects to ensure that our projects have a high level of collaboration. Next slide, please. And at this point, Walter Neubauer will be taking over the presentation.
Thanks, Dave. So to highlight some of the transportation projects that we started in Q1 of 2022, we of course had our winter operations, started our 2022 roads program, our truck bypass camera monitoring pilot program, number of projects we issued for RFP in Q1, our Lincoln Avenue reconstruction design, the Durham Road reconstruction design, and the Bartlett Road reconstruction design. Next slide, please. We also had focus on our Jordan Village Improvement Project with our groundbreaking ceremony that we held on April 4th. Phase 1 is currently under construction. Our Rittenhouse Road reconstruction project is currently underway. We're making good progress there. Aberdeen Road reconstruction project, we had an online public engagement session, and that was completed March 18th. Next slide, please. Our Red Maple Avenue Storm Sewer construction project, that's getting ready to be started. In Q1, we worked closely with the developer to get that project tendered, and we are preparing for an early Q2 construction start date. We also had focus on our Green Lane reconstruction project. We also finished online public engagement for that project on April 7th. Next slide, please. So our outlook for Q2 2022 is to keep the momentum going. We're going to continue with public consultation and finalize detailed design for Aberdeen Road and Hillside Drive reconstruction project, as well as our Green Lane Road, Lincoln Avenue to King Street. That'll be the phase that we focus on reconstructing. We're going to continue our reconstruction projects for Jordan Village, Rittenhouse Road, as well as our 2022 road program. And we're going to award and start detailed design phases for 2023-2024 road reconstruction projects, Lincoln Avenue, Durham Road, and Bartlett Road, all significant projects with the length of road being all the way from King Street to the South Service Road. Next slide, please. And Jillian Harris is going to take over for our environment and safety.
Thank you, Walter. As Walter started off the transportation section with our Q1, the focus at the start has been just preparing and issuing a number of RFPs. And we have those in the works and are bringing forward a number of reports to you over the next few committee of the whole meetings. Next slide, please. Two of our major projects that are ongoing are Lakeshore environmental assessments. We've done a significant amount of consultation. It would not be an exaggeration to say that we've spoke to close to 90%, if not more, of the residents within the area. The larger Lakeshore Road EA 30 to Martin Road, we are working on the conceptual design and working with Indigenous groups. We anticipate being able to, as an update from this one, being able to bring forward the report for the 30-day review process and the ministry approval over the summer. The smaller section, which is the Lakeshore Road east of Martin, so between Martin and Victoria, we're currently just finalizing some consultation with the Indigenous groups, and we're hoping to finalize the project file and issue for public review period within the next month or so. Next slide. Our outlook for Q2 is just to continue on with the number of projects that we do have ongoing, continuing on with the climate resiliency program, as well from Shannon's projection. Just one thing to note, we do have the current rain barrel and the tree giveaway and the subsidized rain barrel program ongoing right now. So if anyone is looking to participate in that program, it's still open and available, and then continuing on with that program, and then starting off with some of the new design and going into construction for some items. Next slide, please. Then the outlook for Q2 for really starts up our spring operations program. So there are a number of things that happen. You will see our crews out there every day working in various areas. One of the ones that has started off is our hydrant flushing program. We're getting ready to do our street sweeping. Snow removal fencing has come down. Sod restoration will be taking place starting soon. We do have another, and I hate to say it, that S word maybe in the forecast again this week for a little bit. So we do want to hold off for some of that work, but sod restoration will be done between now and the end of May. We will be going through and capturing all of those areas and getting them on the list and addressing them. And a number of other items in our operations program as noted on this slide. Next slide, please. And then just as we have 30 projects that are ongoing, the region is also extremely busy in Lincoln, and they do have 12 projects on the go. And these highlight some of the major ones, but under construction right now are the Bridgeport pumping station upgrades. And I believe they're gearing up to do the Camden pumping station upgrades as well right now. But again, a number of designs ongoing, and obviously, just prior to this, there's also discussion about some of the other works happening. So next slide, please. And that concludes kind of the high level overview of our quarterly update, where three of us are happy to take any additional questions that you may have. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Public Works staff. So Councillor Russell, start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Director Graham. Just a very quick question. I know that I saw the design plan for Bartlett, which would be in conjunction with the truck bypass. I know during the budget process, we had asked, with no timelines given, but if we could have a discussion with the region on the viability of that bypass and how we could manage the flow of traffic. I'm just wondering if we could put that back on your to-do list to contact the region and see if we can have them come in for discussion at some point this year before we get to the budget for next year.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely, Councillor Russell, I could take that back to the region. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Graham. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, kudos to our Public Works folks for adding the region's projects to the update. It's very important for us to stay up to date on those projects that we've got there. We know that from past experience that the dates can move on us, and to see these in a regular update, I think is critical for us to stay up to speed as a council, and also as a staff, a regular touch point with the region to make sure that those projects are moving along on the agreed upon timeline. So great work. You know I love this report. It's a fantastic report. Great update for us to really be able to communicate out to the community what's going on and when. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Yeah, it's a helpful dashboard, and Vice Chair Reimer and myself both asked for that. So we can't, it's a holistic report, right? We can't operate in isolation. So it's awesome. So thank you, Director Graham and your staff for pulling this together. Mayor Easton, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I want to follow along the same vein, because this report is extremely important because it comes from council. It begins with expert advice from our staff that is eventually confirmed by council based on quite a lot of information that comes from the community, a lot of which is collected at the door when we do go door to door. That plus our asset management plan, we get all the gaps and priorities identified. And this is a tremendous way to keep the public informed. And I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor McPherson. Getting that report in there on the region is extremely important as well. There's also an accountability piece to this in terms of the RFP process and having that information available both to council and the public. There's timing issues in terms of being on time, but also giving reasons for delays, which is extremely important to the public, because when we approve capital dollars, we don't want to be having several years overlapping. This is a way to make sure that that is all in front of the public and they know exactly what's happening in terms of how their levies are being used. The satisfaction rate I think is also very evident, both quarterly and year end. It is an ideal report and one that, as council, I think, emulates our primary responsibility to the public. And I thank the staff very much for producing this report yet again. Certainly not the first time we've seen it. It meets certainly ticks off all the important accountability boxes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer to receive and file the Public Works Update Report and presentation attached as Appendix A and B respectively for PW 08-22. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Micklef?
Yes.
Mayor Easton? Councillor Timmers? Councillor Timmers, I didn't hear you.
Yes.
Thank you, and Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, that carries.
Thank you, Devan. We will now consider item 7.2.3, report PW 07-22, our 2022 road rehabilitation program tender award. Do members of committee have any questions? There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor McCulloch to receive and file report PW 07-22 for the 2022 Road Rehabilitation Program Tender Award and approve the contract award for the 2022 Road Rehabilitation Program tender to Walker Construction Limited for the amount of $599,367.50, excluding provisional roads as outlined in the report, and approve the mayor and town clerk to sign and seal the contract documents on behalf of the municipality. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call it the vote. Sorry, Devan.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton?
Sorry, yes. I never know when you're going to call.
Thank you. Councillor Micklef?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Devan. And now that our clerks is doing that rotating of the vote, it might be a good idea when we get to that portion, everyone unmute themselves because, yeah, you never know if you're first up. So there being no additional reports to consider for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda, we now have concluded that. We will now rotate and allow Councillor and Vice Chair Mike Michalak to assume the chair at this time for Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. Councillor Michalak, it's your show.
Thank you very much. That came rather quick. So we're now at the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda portion of the meeting. And 8.1 delegations. There are no registered delegations this evening for the Planning and Economic Development Committee. Agenda reports. We had a change of the order. We will now consider item 8.2.4 report AD-09-22 regarding More Homes for Everyone plan. Do members of council have any questions? I don't see any. There being no further discussion. Oh, Mary Easton, you have your hand up.
I do, Mr. Chairman. This is one of the most, well, it is a very, very significant document that's coming our way. And I think that the information that's been provided by staff is certainly something that is worth considering. And I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman, whether we shouldn't have a quick review by staff on some of the recommendations that they've made. So I would ask through you for Mr. Bruder to possibly give us a quick overview of this document.
Mr. Bruder, can you give us a Coles Notes version of what your interpretation is of this?
Well, I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair. Maybe I'll defer to Ms. Dale, who was the author of the report, and then I can chime in as needed, as obviously I've been following this extremely closely as well. Thank you.
Kathleen Dale.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So actually, this report was put together between myself as well as Mr. Bruder and also fire and building staff. Just to sort of give you a bit of a quick synopsis. One of the things that they're recommending is that site plan approval be delegated to staff for all applications as of July 1st of this year. This does not affect Lincoln because in Lincoln, site plan approval has been delegated to the Director of Planning and Development for some time, but there are still municipalities out there that don't have this delegated authority. One of the things I think probably, I guess from our point of view, one of the more controversial things that they're proposing is for zoning and site plan approval. They're proposing that if the municipality doesn't make a decision within the legislative timeframe, and it varies depending on whether it's a site plan approval or a zoning, that all or a portion of the fees go back to the applicant. So it's almost like they're penalizing a municipality for not proceeding and getting a decision on applications within the legislative timeframe. The issue that staff have with this, and Matt can probably speak to this since he's doing this on a daily basis, is that with whether it's a site plan application or a zoning application, the planning staff are required to circulate those applications to other departments and agencies. There's issues that come up with any application. Some are straightforward, but some of them do have a lot of issues. It could be a conservation authority issue. It could be an urban design issue. It could be traffic study. And what we find is with some of those issues, it does sometimes take time to resolve the issue. And I know that the planning staff do like to make sure that they take a report to committee and council, when they've got everything addressed rather than with issues hanging. For subdivisions, they're looking at setting some standard conditions. We don't yet know what those standard conditions of subdivision approval are. One of the things that the region did quite a few years back with all the local municipalities, and they put together a standard list of conditions, and that was in consultation with the development community. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the province's final recommendations. We don't have an issue with extension of draft approval because that's something that's already delegated to staff. We don't have a lot of old draft plans, say a draft plan that lapsed 5 years ago, and you can now actually reactivate those draft plans without going through the full process. We don't really have any plans in Lincoln that are in that category, so that really doesn't affect us. They're looking for something called the Community Housing Accelerator. There's not a lot of details on it, and until you actually see some of the regulations, it's hard to give very, very detailed comments, but it looks like it's very similar to what's referred to as a minister's zoning order, where you can ask the province to zone lands. It may be a situation where there's a housing proposal and you can get an approval from the province quicker than going through the usual planning process. But again, we're going to have to sort of follow the details when they come out. There are some changes to the building code that allow for higher timber buildings. Right now, once you get over a certain height, the structure has to be concrete. So they're looking at changes to the building code with that. Now, both fire and building don't have any issue with this. One of the positive things that's coming out of this is allowing our chief building officials to supervise what you would refer to as interns. So interns would be people that might have just recently graduated, but they haven't taken all of the ministry courses, and they would work under the supervision of the CBO. Right now, you have to do that through a different agency. So this is actually a positive thing, because I can tell you that over the years, whenever you have a building staff person leave, it is very, very difficult to find somebody that's qualified because of the minister's requirement. So this is actually a good thing for young people to get into, the building programs and work under, knowledgeable people such as our CBOs. They are making some changes to parkland dedication. That's not going to affect us because we don't have any major transit areas. We have a future transit area, but it's not considered in the terms of the province a major transit area. They are recommending what's referred to as a use of bonds. Right now, in the past, it was either a letter of credit or a cash deposit. Planning staff have already implemented that recommendation, and they're doing this for site plan approval. And in order to do so, planning staff did seek legal advice on this. In regards to data collection, I don't think that's going to be an issue because there is quite a bit of data collection already done. It's just a matter of what sort of form the province is going to want that in. They're looking at providing some population information. A lot of that information is provided at the regional level because the region is the one that's responsible for assigning population and growth. And hopefully they're going to provide that to the local municipalities as well. In regards to some of the digital information and electronic applications, the planning staff are already working on that. At the OLT, they're looking at more staff to reduce the backlog. As well, one thing that staff do take issue with is there is a provision in there where the minister can appeal an entire official plan. Back in 2014, when the town approved the town approved it and it had to go to the region for approval in 2015. It took some time to get the ministry just to back off on the portions that they didn't agree with. And then it took quite a bit more time, to get the entire part of the official plan approved. So when they have these powers, whether they'll use them or not, it's hard to know, but it really does delay implementing the what I would call the non-appealable or the non-issue portions. They're looking at providing provincial land for housing. I'm not aware that we have any in Lincoln. They're also looking at some changes that for example, the region of Niagara is the service provider for housing. So they're looking at providing some changes to provide better access for housing. One of the big issues is a lot of the nonprofit housing that was built in the past was subject to agreements with various agencies that they had to provide those units as affordable for X number of years. Generally, it was in the 35-year range. A lot of those buildings and those agreements are actually coming due. So there is a concern that there's quite a bit of what we would deem affordable housing that may disappear if those funding agreements are not extended. And then there's also some changes that don't really affect the local municipalities so much as the actual purchasers and people who are renting units are looking at putting some more controls in place. And when we look at the memo that was attached to this report, there was a summary of the Housing Task Force recommendations, which was provided to the Housing Committee. So if you look at a lot of those task force recommendations, they haven't implemented all of them. They're looking at getting some additional input on some of those recommendations. So just to give you an example, one of the initial task force recommendations was the 4 units as of right in low density areas. So that's one of the examples where they're looking at some more input on that. So generally speaking, that's, I don't know if that's quick, but that's a synopsis of some of the changes in the report.
Thank you very much.
Synopsis. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. That was very helpful. I think there's 2 very important items that came out of the report. Certainly one of them is the last piece on how mortgages will be handled in the future for affordable housing. And I know that there is a strategy that has been developed at the regional level on this. It's been under discussion for quite a long time. So these cross connections are really important as our housing committee goes forward, because we don't want these documents to cause further delays along that route. Mr. Chairman, when we look at the performance level of the town of Lincoln, there are a number of things that came up in this document that I don't believe that they represent the way we do business here. And therefore, I'd like to suggest that we provide direction to staff to actually create a report for council that could be an addendum to this, which identifies what our track record is. There's a lot in here that's being meted out by the province because of some behaviors in a number of municipalities. Obviously, it's serious enough that the industries are taking municipalities on. And I could be wrong, but I don't believe that that's our performance level. So I would like to direct that to to our CAO, Mr. Kokopoulos, in terms of him supporting the use of staff to provide a report. I don't know how difficult or how much time that would be. That would be my recommendation out of this report.
I'm acting as vice chair, so unfortunate Council or Chair Brunet is not able to attend this evening. That's a pretty quite the ask. Was the province not, and maybe I can throw this to the CAO, did the province open this for input from municipalities? Are we to ask staff for a report, a detailed report that would take a considerable amount of time?
Well, I'm asking through you, Mr. Chairman, to hear that from the CAO. This report was obviously in response to the document that came out from the province, the More Homes document. This is the staff response to it. But I'm digging a little deeper. I want to know what our track record actually is. And I'd like you to pass that on to the CAO so that I can hear what he might have to say on how long it would take to do that.
Before I do, I see Ms. Dale has her hand up. Ms. Dale, did you want to add something further before I go to the CAO?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So I think the thing with the task force recommendations is they're painting all municipalities, with the same brush. I would have to say that when we compare like the town of Lincoln with some other municipalities, we're probably ahead of the curve more than some of the other municipalities. We do have quite a bit of delegated authority, which does help the planning staff process things much quicker than in some areas. And as well, for example, with any of the applications that do go before committee and council, the planning staff do report on, the legislative timeframe versus the time it took to process it and take it for a decision. So there is some of that information. I don't know whether Matt wants to add to my comments since he's really in charge of planning.
Matt, quickly, if
Yeah,
you like to add
Mr.
something further?
Not really, just being consistent with Ms. Dale's comments. I think that's something we can definitely look at. We have the data to support, providing a synopsis for information. So I don't think that would be any problem.
Okay, that would.
I believe these are recommendations. I don't know if they're expectations. I don't know if they're demands by the province. I believe they're recommendations. So whether all municipalities are doing these recommendations or not currently, or should be, perhaps our CAO, he has his hands up and can add some further thoughts on this.
So through you, Mr. Vice Chair, and I think both Kathleen and Matt will attest to this. The bill has received royal assent. So it is it is moving forward. They're not just recommendations at this particular point. So these are part of the Planning Act. They're part of the statutes and acts that we now need to adhere to. Or I think to the initial question as to whether staff can spend the time, I think we can, in fairly short order, at least provide a summary report and try to put an assessment together in terms of how Lincoln does relative to other municipalities. I think, as Ms. Dale said, anecdotally, I think both Matt, her, and I could tell you we do well. I was recently on a panel a few weeks ago speaking about responsible development with Tim Hudak, who is one of the authors of the report and a former Conservative Party leader here in the province, as well as an MPP for us, and Marion Mead Ward for the mayor of Burlington, really talking about this particular issue and these recommendations and what happens post-election now. So definitely, I think Lincoln is seen as a leader in this particular area in terms of how we're assessing recommendations like this, how we're finding compromises, and how we're bringing reports forward. I think there's a way for us to put that in a report and sort of a little bit of a matrix, a little bit of an assessment as to how Lincoln's doing. So shouldn't be too long and shouldn't be too in depth, but definitely something staff can put together.
Mr. Bruder, quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yeah, just to add to that, I think one of the things that staff are looking at now, and we have been even before, we've gotten to this point, it's going to require a little bit of a close look at how we do things, how we intake certain types of applications, how we process, because now, the kind of framework in which we do so has changed a little bit. So we're going to have to do a little bit of legwork as well, as are all other municipalities. I know we're talking about this at the regional level too, just in terms of how we address some of these timeline requirements and how we approach in taking applications. So that's another facet that feeds into, you know, what our track record has been and what it will be moving forward. Thank you.
Mayor Easton?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. That sounds very promising, and obviously it's not an urgent report. I leave that to the discretion of the staff, but thank you very much for facilitating my request.
You're very welcome. Councillor Rinjema.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions. First question was what I was mentioning earlier on in the application that we had, the public meeting earlier on in the agenda about a consent that was that's been delegated to staff because there was nothing heard from the public. So staff has the right to approve that consent. And then there was an associated agricultural purposes only zoning application. So if we decided that we were going to delegate that to staff, and that makes sense to me, because again, it's just kind of wrapping up a bow on an existing approval for a consent that we've already said that staff can do. How do we go about doing that? What kind of process do we need to go through?
Mr. CAO, I believe you have your hand up.
Through you, Mr. Vice Chair, let me take a stab at it. And I just saw Kathleen's hand jump up as well. You know, I think anything that council looks to delegate to staff, we can bring back the appropriate policies and discuss with clerks. I think as Kathleen mentioned, this council has done a good job and has trusted in staff in delegating responsibilities to us. I think if you look at the language in this particular report, you'll see there's a desire by the province, if not to remove complete local autonomy and decision-making, to delegate it to staff. And so I think that's in alignment with what you're reading and what you're seeing. But again, that is at council's discretion.
Ms. Daly, you have your hand up. Did you want to add something quick further?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So previously, there were some changes made to the Planning Act that does allow for some further delegations that normally things that would have had to go to council. Some of those examples where, you know, like minor variances. So say it's an uncontested minor variance or minor zoning amendments. Those things can be delegated to staff. There's just a bit of the planning staff, I believe, took a report on this a while back, and it's just a matter of getting some of that stuff implemented.
Councillor Rinjema?
Yeah, so APOs were part of that, or were they not? I don't remember.
Director Dale.
So specifically, the wording was minor zoning bylaw amendments. So as an example, at least in my opinion, a minor zoning bylaw amendment would be something that is implementing another decision. So a condition of consent to change the zoning on a property, that would be considered a minor zoning. Even things like garden suites could potentially be considered, you know, a minor zoning bylaw amendment application. So it would be those types of applications that would be considered minor are ones that would have the potential to be delegated to staff. It still has to go through a public process, but the bylaw approval, for example, would be by staff, and there has to be some further delegations of that for that to happen.
Okay, well, it sounds like there's a report on that coming forward, and at that time I'll ask more questions about how we would handle the public process. But so I appreciate that, and I have one more question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
The proposal that municipalities have to return some fees if they don't meet certain timeframes. Do we know how that's proposed to be? Is there going to be an application process to get those fees back, or how is it determined? What are the issues that led to a quote unquote delay in processing the applications? Who makes that decision?
Director Dale, that's an interesting question.
So, Mr. Chairman, if this change ends up in the Planning Act, it's going to be automatic. You won't have any discretion. So and what they've done is they've done it in a graduated manner. So for example, site plan approval, 50% of the fee would have to be refunded to the applicant. If there's no decision made within 60 days, a little bit less if it's 90 days, and then a quarter of it, if the decision's made after 120 days. So these are changes that are proposed to the Planning Act. If they do make their way into the final version of the Planning Act, they're going to be an audit. They're going to be something the municipality will automatically have to provide that refund.
Certainly does.
Councillor Rinjema.
Yeah, that certainly is going to put an urgency on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further. Just to follow up, Director Dale, to that. So with regards to that timeline, what's the expectation on the developer to return their reviewed or renewed site plan back to council or back to planning staff, and not on the 59th day?
So, Mr. Chairman, I probably don't have a complete answer for you, but that can be an issue. Like with site plan approval, the planning staff will send out their comments, and sometimes you don't hear from them for a while. So it's probably going to depend on how they word the final versions, whether it's just the staff review time or whether it includes the whole process. So I don't have an answer to that at this point.
Mr. Bruder, your hand is up.
Yeah, I thought that was a good question too, Mr. Chair. I think one of the things that we're going to be looking at as well, which I alluded to earlier, was looking at, as of right now, when we look at these applications and determining their completeness before the clock actually starts ticking is probably something else we're going to be looking at, revising our approach to. There might be more steps taken now to ensure the application is complete in terms of the actual, achieving a higher quality of submission from the get-go before we actually start the review and circulation process. So I think those are things we have to hone in on a little bit more because Ms. Dale is correct. There isn't really a lot of guidance given on how we address, potential long wait times in terms of developers or their consultants providing revisions to submissions or things like that. So in my mind, that would mean we would have to try to iron out as many of those things as we can from the get-go earlier on before we actually start. So definitely more to come on that, but I can see us going in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Just see it a bit of a challenge from a staffing perspective for some municipalities, and given the number of applications that are occurring these days, and hoping that the province has thought this through properly, that we don't have more work for the OLT to do. So I don't see any further hands. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Rinjema. Council received report AD-09-22 regarding the province's More Homes for Everyone plan and Bill 109, an act to amend the various statutes with respect to housing, development, and various other matters. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Chair Micklick?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Okay. We are now considering item 8.2.1, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, applications for garden suites by the town of Lincoln, PD-21-22. Do members of council have any questions? Councillor Timmers.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I'm reading through the new policy recommended and guidelines. I'm just wondering how we stack up, with the provincial plans and our official plan. And there's a lot of changes here, and some of them I'm not quite sure why they're being included. Are you having a hard time hearing? For example, on page 131, the bullet, I'm sorry, I had to turn off my second screen, so now I'm going to have a problem here. The bullet that restricts an entire property. If there's a garden suite on the property, the entire balance of the property is restricted from having a home business, such as a bed and breakfast or an Airbnb. And I can't understand why that bullet has been added. And I'm not supportive of that whatsoever. So through to planning staff, where is that coming from and why is that included?
So is your question basically with regards to how does this stack up to other municipalities and their garden suite policy?
I would like to know how the school policy is in line with existing policies. And then I'd also like to discuss some of the specific bullets that have been added to this version.
Okay. Where is Allison? Allison will speak to this report.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The purpose of that provision being added into the zoning bylaw is to ensure that the garden suite isn't used for other purposes other than intended in the agreement.
And, and that's fine, Allison. I don't have a problem with the garden suite being used for a business, but the way that it's worded, it's including the entire property. So the rest of the property cannot have a home business. That's very restrictive and almost punitive to someone who puts a garden suite on their property. So I would like to support that we make an amendment on that bullet to change the wording to where the garden suite cannot have a home business, but this is not going to affect the balance of the property in the existing home.
Allison, what are your thoughts? Or I see Monica Coquiar, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to also add that I think another reason for that policy is to ensure that there's not multiple residential type uses on a property, say in the agricultural area. So a garden suite, bed and breakfast, Airbnbs. I think it sort of limits the amount of residential type uses on a property as well.
So I'll just to follow up a little bit, how does that compare with other municipalities and their wording in their bylaws? I think that's where Councillor Timmers was trying to. Have we investigated that? Mr. Bruder, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. We did look at kind of all facets of this. I think really the main objective here is to also realize that, all these buildings, yes, there's going to be, the garden suite, perhaps a single detached dwelling, maybe an accessory structure, all within the existing kind of cluster of buildings, which is what we're proposing to be required in our policies and provisions. And, we looked at other municipalities, and that's a general, provision too, really for the purposes of minimizing impacts to farmland. But is there actual, I don't recall if there was an actual provision in every other municipality's provision for garden suites pertaining to Airbnbs or B&Bs. I think it's one of those things, there could be some inherent compatibility impacts. The real intention of a garden suite is for, is to accommodate for, family members that are required to live close to other family members. There is perhaps some property succession to be considered, things like that. And then, I think the thought is throwing in an Airbnb and what could come along with that creates a little bit of an enforcement issue. And also there could be a compatibility impact there due to some fairly close proximities of different uses. So all things considered, those are kind of the main reasons why we made this recommendation. Again, it's not, I don't think it's necessarily reflected in those policies of other municipalities, but this was us thinking, trying to think Lincoln specific and in terms of what possible concerns we could be encountering. Thank you.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair. Just a further comment. So I guess where I have a problem with this, restricting someone's property from making a living perhaps with a home business, to me, it doesn't make any sense. It's very restrictive. The Garden Suite is a completely separate entity. It could be on a very large property where there's plenty of space, and it is an approved use for a rural property to have it a bed and breakfast. I just don't know where this is coming from and why it's been included, and I'm just not supportive of this whatsoever. I think this entire policy is too restrictive. It's overreaching. All the comments we received from residents were looking for a made in improvements, not more restrictions, more red tape. This is not supportive of families who are trying to have different types of housing to accommodate their family, to stay on their land, to stay on their property, for retirement, for succession planning. This is not supportive of that. And I don't see that it's supportive of the More Homes for Everyone plan either. It's very restrictive, and I would definitely like to have that bullet removed or reworded. Thank you.
Mr. Bruder, I see your hand is up one more time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to speak to the comment about red tape. I think, you know, that's a little bit of a different issue I'd like to address for a minute. I don't think necessarily adding in a provision. When I think about red tape, I think about process and the means to get to, you know, where an application can proceed. And here, what we're trying to do, maybe this particular provision aside, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify more clearer, call it a framework of policy, so that, you know, it's literally an opportunity to look at it and check off the boxes. And as long as it does, it's able to move forward much clearer. I think some of the previous critiquing of the existing policies that we've had, where they were a little bit, there might be too much gray in certain circumstances, and how did staff make this determination when they made a different determination here, perhaps. We're trying to hone in on that a little bit with the objective of streamlining the process then, because we have a more clear set of provisions. And also, I think, you know, we're looking at the framework in terms of how we administer the process now. You know, we used to have a separate fee, for example, kind of almost a separate process for a temporary use agreement after we approve the temporary use amendment. Now we want to roll that all into one, similar to how we do it with site plan approval, to make it a little bit easier, make it move a little bit more, again, in a streamlined manner. So again, I just wanted to touch base on that red tape issue. I'm not downplaying any of the concerns or comments that have been raised with respect to that particular point, that particular bullet pertaining to Airbnbs and B&Bs and other accommodations, but I just wanted to address the red tape issue a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kruger. Fair enough that, you know, I understand the red tape comment probably wasn't accurate, but I just have this feeling that we're putting a restriction on someone's entire property because they decided to put accommodations for family members who live on a temporary use, and now their entire property is compromised on what they can or cannot do. And I just think that is really out of line and it doesn't belong in this policy. Thank you both for my comments.
Mr. Kirkopoulos, you have your hand up.
Through you, Mr. Vice Chair. I mean, initially, you know, my thought is maybe to listen to all the comments, but I will say that I don't think we're married to any provision that's included in here. If we need to do some slight wording tweaks, a couple of minor amendments, I think we can do that. I think council knows, and this council has supported the need for us to look at short-term accommodations and making those less restrictive in terms of short-term accommodation. So there's some tweaking that we need to do to the language. I think, you know, staff are all watching that, both planning staff and myself, and I think, you know, economic development are all looking at the language here. Our goal was never to be, I think, restrictive, councillors, but let's, you know, I'm going to listen, and I think all of staff is listening. Let's hear the rest of the comments from members of council, and if we need to make some minor tweaks, we can.
So just to clarify, Councillor Timmers, did you want to put a motion on the floor to make a change for us to vote on making that change or not making that change?
Well, at this point, Chair Nicholas, I think an amendment would be sufficient. As our CAO said, we could remove it or reword it. I would be
Okay.
satisfied with that at this point. I don't think a motion is required right now.
Sorry, you're correct. An amendment to the proposed motion.
Through you to the chair, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
So an amendment would be required if we were going to make that change, which Councillor Timmers earlier did put that forward. And it is that clause 2B13 be removed and that home occupants such as Airbnbs, group homes, and rooming houses be permitted on the same lot. Essentially, it's removing that bullet from the bylaw.
Okay, do members of council, I see we have Councillor Winchema, Petrieva, and Reimer. Do any members have any questions with regards to that proposed amendment brought forward by Councillor Timmers? Councillor Petrieva is nodding his head no. Councillor Winchema, you have a question to that? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, but I missed a little bit of what Mr. Bruder said because I had to take a quick break. I heard some of it, but my question is, if somebody did want to establish one of these other uses that on the rest of their property, would it require a zoning amendment or a minor variance, or is it just no?
Mr. Bruder, would this still be possible with an amendment?
It could be, yeah, but they would require the appropriate amendments. So we'd have to go through a process for that, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Winchema.
And would that be a minor variance or a zoning amendment? Or how would that be determined?
Through you, Mr. Chair, because it's actually adding a use that's not prohibited, we'd probably have to go through a full amendment process. I wouldn't think this would be appropriate for a minor variance.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to listen more. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now, before I leave you, did you have a question to the original report as well?
I guess that was a question to the original. No.
Okay.
It's a question to both, but I got my answer. So thank you.
So I see Councillor Petrieva, Reimer, and Russell. Does anyone have any questions to that amendment? No. Councillor Russell, you have your hand up. You're saying yes. What? Go ahead.
This is more a procedural question. The amendment is coming, again, I'm trying to put this as carefully as possible. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the clerk. This amendment is coming from somebody who's building a garden suite on their property, and it could impact them one way or another. Is that at all a conflict that it's being brought forward by a person with a vested interest?
That would, our deputy clerk, your thoughts?
Yes, give me one moment. I do just want to confirm with the town clerk, as it would be the council member's responsibility to declare that interest. And I'll just ask the town clerk to weigh in also, please.
So in saying that, the amendment was brought forward by Councillor Timmers, and yes, she is currently in that process. However, the amendment would be impactful to all residents of the town of Lincoln, not just herself, but I can't ask a councillor to declare a conflict of interest. It is up to that individual councillor to do so if they feel that it is a conflict of interest. But because this amendment is on the floor from Councillor Timmers, there is a required vote to be had. So I will leave that with the individual councillor if they wish to withdraw that amendment or to carry forward.
Councillor Timmers, I'll revert to yourself quickly. Do you want to proceed with this amendment, or would you like to pull it, remove it, withdraw?
I would like to proceed because, as the clerk said, this will affect every single resident in town of Lincoln, whoever decides that they would like to have this type of application. And considering my application was almost a year ago, I personally don't feel that this is a conflict. I am asking for residents
Okay, so you're breaking up a little bit there. So you would like to proceed?
Did you
Yes.
not hear, were you not able to hear any of my comments, or?
It's a little, I don't know if it's just for myself, but it's a little bit.
Okay, I do proceed because I am bringing this
Okay.
to the residents of Jonathan. Thank you.
Okay, then Councillor Reimer, you didn't have a question to that amendment? Okay, then let's vote on the amendment. Deputy Clerk Devan, would you please call the vote on the amendment that Councillor Timmers has brought forward?
Thank you. And just so everyone is
Do you
clear
want to
that,
see it on the screen?
yes, give me one moment. Can you see my Word document here? So that clause 2B13 being where a garden suite is constructed on a lot, home occupants, oh my goodness, such as Airbnbs, group homes, and rooming houses are prohibited on the same lot be removed. And with that, I'm going to call the vote. Councillor Reimer?
Yes, in favor.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
No.
Councillor Regina?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
And Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Okay. So now we're going to discuss the original motion. Councillor Ryan, Councillor Pachariva, I think you had your hand up first, so I'll go to you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Miklick. Yeah, and I appreciate staff bringing this report forward. They've streamlined the garden suite application, and they've provided stronger guidance for the applicants. They've taken the application fee and temporary use agreement fee and put them together, but I still think there's a little bit more work that could be done. The $5,000 temporary use fee that is there could be onerous to residents going forward. We don't require that from any other temporary use. And today we had a tour as part of ECDEV Week, and we heard comments from both parties at Newport and from Frank Wall from Trenchline about how we eliminate red tape and how this separates Lincoln from other municipalities and how they love working with us. And we also heard about staff and how they find to work solutions. And I think Councillor McPherson said it's a testament to what council last term started with ECDEV, and staff has followed through on that. The same philosophy I feel needs to apply to housing. We've got 4 members of council and the mayor who sit on our housing committee, and across the region and province, affordable housing and attainable housing are priorities. I think as it's being suggested, a deferral to this that looks at how we can expedite approvals versus the opposite is the right approach and the prudent approach. I agree that this policy document isn't how we normally do it. I understand council directed staff, but I would be remiss if we simply approve it and then the suggestions that staff relook at it through our chief planner and CAO and CAO's office to see if we can eliminate some redundant pieces. We don't want to create red tape, especially for housing. And I think the whole concept around garden suites is to allow our current residents to age in place. I think it's very important. And I think it's very important that we get it right. So that would be my, I guess, suggestion or motion that we take a little deferral to this and have a second sober thought. Make sure we've got all the I's dotted and the T's crossed and make it succinct.
Did you want to put that motion on the
That
floor?
is, yes, please, VC McCluck. I would like to do that.
Okay. Do any members of council have any questions with regards to the motion that Councillor Pachariva has just? Councillor McPherson, I see you were waving your hand first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I can disagree more with my esteemed colleague here in that This is a fee that is being collected for potential removal of the garden suite after 20 years. And I would venture to say that 20 years down the road, $5,000 is not going to get you far if we have to remove that garden suite. So it is a, in my opinion, a necessary fee, not unlike fees that our developers are paying, and that when they get their community or their subdivision approved, they get monies back. Same process. So this is in my opinion, nominal fee when you start to think about the expense of some of these garden suites that are going to go up at 1,500 square feet, at who knows how much per square foot, and is necessary to keep the integrity of the agreement in place. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The temporary nature of this, that's correct?
Yeah, the 20-year agreement.
The temporary.
Sure.
Or less, 20 or less. Any other questions to Councillor Timmers? You had your hand up again. Is this to Councillor Pachariva's motion on the floor?
I think there were councillors that have been Councillor Reimer prior.
I'm having trouble understanding what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Oh, why? I said Councillor Reimer had his hand up prior to me.
I don't. Councillor Reimer, did you have a question to Councillor Pachariva's motion on the floor? No, he's nodding no.
Okay, well, I would like to second that motion.
Okay. I see no other hands up with regards to Councillor Pachariva's motion. Deputy Clerk, call out the vote.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, just for clarification to the members of council, this is to defer the report back to staff for additional review and comment. And with that, that was moved by Councillor Pachariva. So Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Sorry, Devin, can you please clarify the motion that's on the table?
Sure, through you, Chair. So the motion brought forward by Councillor Pachariva was for the deferral of the report for staff to provide additional review regarding the fees.
I seem to hear an elimination of the fee in Councillor Pachariva's motion.
Sorry, Councillor, I'm having trouble hearing you.
My interpretation was an elimination of the $5,000 fee. Am I not hearing that right?
Correct. So from my understanding through you, Chair, the motion moved by Councillor Pachariva was to defer the report back to staff for review of the fees.
I'm going to say no.
Just to clarify, Councillor Pachariva, was it the fee specifically or other aspects of the report as well?
No, well, it was looking at the fees, like they combined the two fees together and reduced it there. So maybe, maybe it's the $5,000 deposit is rolled into the other, so it's an upfront. I don't know, but it, they've done it with two. Let's see if they can be a little more diligent with the fee structure, right? So, because again, this is if we're talking housing and we're talking affordability and we're talking allowing residents to age in place, we need to get this right, in my humble opinion. So,
Mr. Bruder, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So I guess I'd just like to clarify. Yes, so we're going to have a fee, like an actual application fee that's required to account for staff's time to process the application, like anything else. And then what we're talking about here, the $5,000, that's a deposit. So and the purpose of that is further to what Councillor McPherson was saying, that that's in term of security to make sure the use remains temporary, to make sure that that temporary use is discontinued at the end of the 20-year period. And that's in recognition. The need for that is just because of the stringent policies we have in our rural areas, whether it be with Greenbelt legislation, Niagara Escarpment Plan area legislation, or even just specialty crop designation that really precludes or prohibits more than one residential dwelling on a property out in our rural area. So we just want to make sure that we have those securities there to ensure that that remains the case at the end of the temporary use period, so that the applicant would get that money back. But I just wanted to make the distinction because there is the application fee that's money that gets paid to the town for the staff time, and then there's this deposit that would be returned. So again, looking at what other municipalities do, this is a fairly common approach. The amount seems to be fairly consistent as well. I suppose if council did want us to look at that in even further detail, we could, but it's not something that's unusual when it comes to these garden suite applications. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Mayor Easton and Councillor Russell's hands are up. Councillor Reimer's hand is up as well. Councillor Reimer, you've had your hand up probably 3 times during this discussion. Did you want to chime in at this time? Would you like to chime in at this time?
Briefly.
Okay.
Just because we have a motion on the floor and I'm the only one that voted, I understood Devan to say we were deferring the report. And that's what I voted on, to defer the entire report, not just the fee. So
to defer the entire report.
The entire report for staff review, and that's what I affirmed. Just because I was the only one that voted, I just wanted to make sure. So that's my comment to that so far.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mayor Easton.
Sorry, through you, Chairman, if I could just clarify quickly to Councillor Reimer's point. So he is correct. That is the motion. The report as a whole will be deferred so staff can review the fees and deposit structure. So it's the full report being deferred. Thank you.
We've not voted on that yet, Councillor Reimer. So that
that is correct. However, Councillor Reimer has disclosed his vote as we were in the middle of voting prior to members of council asking additional questions.
Yeah, I voted first. Yeah.
Okay.
And Councillor McPherson.
Mayor Easton.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I also thought that the entire report was being deferred because there's a whole lot of other things in this document that I think needs to be analyzed against the previous report that we received, the staff analysis that we received on the report, the homeless report. It was at 09/22, I think it was. And so I was looking, yes, 09/22, I was looking for additional information. Mr. Chairman, I can think of one example of temporary use. I'm going to be very careful how I word this because I don't want anybody in the community to be pointed out. It went on year after year after year. There were no fees assigned to it. It really was a matter of the staff having due diligence around when that temporary use came up for review. And so I would think that technology in the future would look after this. However, my understanding was that the entire report was going back for analysis. If we need an amendment to that, I'm happy to make it, Mr. Chairman.
No, that's what we're looking at, is sending the entire report back to staff to answer questions. And should councillors have any further questions that they'd like to follow up with staff prior to them bringing another final report, perhaps we can do that in the next week or 2.
Okay, that's a good idea. Thank you.
That would be my thoughts, but I see Mr. Kirkopoulos has his hand up.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair. I'm going to wait and hear from council and then just try to clarify what we're coming back with. So let me maybe come back to me towards the end, Councillor.
Fair enough. Councillor Pachariva, in order, you have your hand up. So go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's not just the fees, to look at the whole report. So
The whole
thank you. Sorry, I just want to clarify that. So
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, along the CAO's lines, I'm just looking for clarification. It is very, very broad to have the entire report go back, and then it seems to be not exactly transparent to have councilors reach out to staff after the fact to share their concerns about said report and whatever changes they're looking for. I know that Councillor Patriva has mentioned the fees tonight, but I would like to see whatever other concerns be raised in public, so that at least they can be discussed as a whole, as opposed to being sent to staff through emails or other communications.
Okay, that's, we'll get back to that in a second. Mayor Easton, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just in follow up then, if I'm the next speaker, I would like to make an amendment to the motion to the deferral to clarify that an analysis be done of this report, PD 21-22, against the report AD 09-22, in which there are a number of restrictions, red tape restrictions that are repeated on a number of occasions in the document, as well as delegated authorities that are also outlined quite extensively in the document. I would put that on the table, Mr. Chairman, for greater transparency and clarification.
I see our town clerk has her hand up. Julie?
Yeah, just for procedural. So we have the main motion. Now we have an amendment to an amendment. And then we have the amendment. So what we're going to do procedurally to the deputy clerk and to the chair, you're going to vote on the amendment to the amendment, which is the Mayor Easton's. And should that carry or fail, we go to the amendment, which was raised by Councillor Pachariva, and then you go to the motion. So you can only have 3 motions on the floor at any given time in total. So we now have an amendment to an amendment. So if the chair and the deputy clerk could clarify Mayor Easton's motion that she's just put forward, so that we can get council to vote on that, please.
No problem. And through you, Chair, the current motion moved by Mayor Easton is that staff review AD 09-2022 and PD 2022 in conjunction together. Mayor Easton, is that correct?
I would clarify it even more, because we're dealing with PD 21-22. I would ask that it be compared against AD 09-22 because I want to see whether or not we meet the provincial requirements in relation to their recommendations around red tape and also delegated authority.
Okay, so that the two be compared against each other and a synopsis be provided. And with that, Chair, I'm going to call the vote. Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
No.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries. And if I may proceed to the amendment from Councillor Pachariva?
So Councillor Pachariva's amendment, can you read that aloud before we vote on that?
I can, and that is moved by Councillor Pachariva, that report PD 21-22 regarding the official plan zoning bylaw amendment applications for garden suites by the town of Lincoln be deferred back to staff for additional review.
Just additional review, nothing
It
specific?
included additional review as the whole. I have in brackets the deposits and fees.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And with that, I will ask Councillor Timmers.
Yes.
Councillor Rajima, I see your hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a I'm not really sure how this all fits into this, but what I'm hearing is that there's, Councillor Patrick is saying housing is very important, and that seems to be sort of a thread that's woven through this whole discussion. And a few weeks ago, we talked about vacation rental units and what we're doing for that. And I asked that sort of a comparison chart, Venn diagram thing be brought back to compare what we're doing for vacation rental units versus what we're doing with housing incentives. So it seems to me like what we're talking about tonight again is the importance
Sorry,
of
Councillor Regima. We're just in the middle of the vote, and I just want to clarify that this is pertaining to the amendment on the floor.
I know, and I'm asking for clarification on that. Okay, so I understand what you're saying, but I'm trying to figure out where to fit in this discussion because there's only allowed to have 2 amendments on the floor at once. So I understand Councillor Pachariva wants to send this report back to staff because he feels that housing and accessibility to affordable housing should be a priority through this whole discussion. So that's I just want to make sure that's part of the motion that's going back, that the priority or that the focus be on housing and accessibility to quote unquote affordable housing. And then there's this other comparison table that I've asked for too. So I don't know how that's going to all come together. But all of it, we're talking about housing. When we talk about vacation rental units, we talk about housing incentives, we talk about garden suites. The point of all of it, of that discussion, was the point of comparing vacation rental units to housing incentives was to make sure that we're not pinching off what we're trying to do for housing incentives with the vacation rental unit policies. And today I'm hearing we want to make sure that we're not restricting access to housing for people through what we're doing for garden suites. So yes, I'll support Councillor Pachariva's motion and the mayor's motion. I'd like maybe some wording to go in there, Councillor Pachariva, that attention be paid to our goals as a council to provide housing across the municipality.
Councillor Pachariva, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Thank you.
Chair, give me 1 second, please.
Councillor McPherson, while we're waiting, you had your hand up. Did you want to add something further?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just going to ask clerk for the difference between the mayor's amendment and Councillor Pachariva's amendment. And it seems that there are 2 amendments that are asking the same thing to me. So maybe some clarification.
I'm not disagreeing with you. To the clerk, Councillor Pachariva, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I thought the mayor's took care of mine and then mine became redundant. So I think if we voted on hers, that grasped the aspects of mine. So I think we're done, really.
Well, there was an issue. There was a concern that Councillor Russell had brought up in the issue of transparency for councillors to voice their concerns publicly with what their concerns were with the motion. So Deputy Clerk, can you help me out here? This got pretty complicated. Got pretty.
Sorry. Yes, through you, Chair. And I just want to, I believe I heard a withdrawal from Councillor Pachariva of that motion to withdraw that motion.
Are you withdrawing that motion, Councillor Pachariva? We're in the middle of a vote for it.
Yeah, no, and Chair McCulloch, or Vice Chair McCulloch, I would withdraw it if we can weave in Councillor Regima's ask into the mayor's. So we pull everything into one motion. I know, Devan, I'm sorry, but right, she's got some issues there. If we're talking about housing, if we're talking about affordability, if that's going to be the linchpin. So, or do we need to do it separately? I'm
Through you, Chair. So the mayor's motion did encompass the comparison of a AD 09-2022, which, if I'm looking, is the More Homes for Everyone plan, which would encompass housing as a whole. So I would consider that to be considered from Councillor Regima. that would be inclusive of the mayor's motion, which would mean that your motion could just be that the fulsome review as you presented.
Okay.
Perfect. Councillor Richima, what are your thoughts? You have your hand up still.
Yeah, sorry, I'll put it down and my mic is on as well. But yeah, I'm okay with that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Perfect. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a thought. And the mayor's request, I think, is pretty straightforward to do a comparison of one report to the other and bring the differences back. I think there's going to be a fulsome discussion when that report comes back. So to get into all of these other items right now doesn't make sense. Or do we get into that discussion when that report comes back? And it's simply a comparison. It's nothing to do with any, as I'm hearing it, it's nothing to do with how we feel about particular items that have been changed. It is going to show us what's been changed, and then we can get into a discussion. Does that make sense?
So I can put that question to either Allison Martin or Kathleen Dale with regards to, would that be beneficial to incorporate the more homes for more, would that cross all the T's and dot the I's with regards to these suites and their relevance to the mayor's ask, the mayor's motion?
Sorry. So through you, Mr. Chairman, the garden suites, how I look at a garden suite is it's a temporary use for up to 20 years. It does provide accommodation for, in most cases, a family member. Can also provide affordable housing for that family member. Your secondary dwelling suites, which under provincial policy are permitted as of right. Those are permanent units, and those can be, those could be rental, or they could be affordable units, and any CIP incentive would only allow them if they are, for example, affordable units. And typically, if you're creating any sort of incentive, you're not going to allow anything that's used for short-term accommodation to have any sort of incentive attached to it. So I think it is, I think as part of the More Homes plan, the province is looking for some additional consultation. So staff could put together some additional comments to send off to the province.
Okay. Mayor Easton, you have your hand up. You're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with this this approach, and I believe that it's with Councillor McPherson. It's going to provide an opportunity for a much more fulsome discussion. We won't be second guessing. We will actually have the comparison in front of us. We can decide what's important and what isn't. And I think that would be better than us. I apologize. It is not uncommon for us to use this technique at the region where councillors will bring forward issues to staff. And so I certainly appreciate the issue of transparency, and we should always be tuned into that. So I'm in agreement with the direction that we're going here. Thank you.
Okay. So we're in the middle of a vote. Let's complete that vote. Where are we in the vote?
Thank you, Chair Micklick. And I'm going to just call the names over again, as there was only one member who voted. And just a reminder, it is to defer the report for additional review. Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
I think so.
Counselor Reimer,
Yes.
I'm actually not quite
Mayor
sure what I'm
Easton?
voting.
Mayor Easton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, support.
Thank you, Counselor Regina.
Can I ask for clarification?
So
We're
to
deferring
clarify,
this
we are
report.
Yeah.
correct. You're deferring
we're
it
just
for
deferring
additional
this report.
information.
I know, but I thought Mayor Easton's report was, or Mayor Easton's motion was sufficient. Did I
So
miss
that
something?
has already approved for the comparison of the two reports in the synopsis. So we are now voting on the deferral of the report for the additional review. And you are up to vote in support or opposition.
Okay.
So essentially,
I don't think we need both motions, but I'm okay with it. Yes.
Thank you. And Counselor Patriva
Yes.
and Chair.
yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Okay, let's move on.
So Chair, you are now at page 18.
Yeah, there's a lot that I didn't have to read there.
That is okay.
There's a whole page I didn't have to read there. Okay, so we will now consider item 8.2.2, report PD-24-22 zoning bylaw amendment by Coles Florist for 4766 Bartlett Road. Do members of council have any questions? There being no further discussion, we have a motion moved by Councillor Russell, council approve report PD-24-22 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment application by Craig Rowe of Upper Canada Consultants on behalf of Coles Florist Inc., subject to the following conditions. 1, that an H holding provision be placed on the zoning of the lands and that the H holding provision not be removed until the following conditions shall be completed to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning in the town of Lincoln. A stormwater management design is provided that can accommodate storm runoff for 5 and 100-year storm events. Council enact and pass zoning bylaw attached as Appendix C of report PD-24-22 to amend the zoning regulations for the lands at 4766 Bartlett Road to permit a garden center on the subject lands. Council deem that zoning bylaw conforms to the official plan for the town of Lincoln, and council declare that they have considered all of the written and oral submissions and agrees with the planning report analysis and recommendations and finds that subject to the conditions of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Regional Official Plan, and the Town Official Plan. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Counselor Regina.
Yes.
Counselor Timmers.
Yes.
Counselor Russell.
Yes.
Counselor Patriva.
Yes.
Counselor McPherson.
Yes.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
Counselor Reimer.
Yes.
Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, and that carries.
Okay, so I've had a couple requests, but moving on to almost 3 hours, we're going to take a bio break. I say we meet back at 9 o'clock, 7 minutes, or does that work?